Sharon's son, George. I'm George, obviously, and really honored today to have not just somebody who's incredible in the caregiver world, but somebody I consider a friend. We're here in episode 3, and obviously I do this not just to get awareness out, but also in memory of my mother. I was her caretaker. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and unfortunately, she passed on 1/1/2020. So we started TogetherForSharon.com in her memory. But today, we want to think about others, and there's no better person who's out there, in my opinion, fighting for others 24/7 than my friend Lance Slatton. And Lance, again, this is just one of many talks, but I just want to thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure, George. And thank you so much for the kind introduction and also for your friendship and the remarkable work you're doing in memory of your mother.
Thank you. And Lance is, of course, not just a friend, but he's been out there much longer than I have. It's been 4 years. I kind of feel I learned something new, but he also teaches me so much. But he's been an award winner, many podcasts, has a YouTube show of All Home Care Matters. So let's all support him there. He's also done so much, a senior care manager, rather than just read this. Obviously, we'll bring it out while we talk, but I think again, it's an honor to have you here. So as we just jump right into this, I wanted to just start off by seeing what prompted you to get into the field and specifically all home care matters.
So thank you, George. My first passion has always been healthcare and helping other people. What prompted us launching All Home Care Matters was our family business. We have a home care company here in Michigan, and we service a good bottom half of the state. And as we all know, COVID changed lives for everyone and the way we did things and what we could do. And even though our business was still labeled and deemed as essential through our governor, all of our extracurriculars, our caregiver support groups, our educational talks, just our fun music events, and our dementia seminars, those things we could slowly see even before the state was on lockdown that people weren't coming out anymore. Everybody's concerned about this new thing, this COVID, and rightly so. And so we were trying to find a way for, at least in our state, we were initially shut down for 2 weeks. That 2 weeks ended up turning into almost 3 years for most of us, right? And we decided, you know what? Let's do a podcast for a little while, for a month or two, and just continue trying to, help these families. And, that 2 months, 1 month of lockdown, that turned into several years. And so we just continued with the show. We've met wonderful, remarkable, and I would even say inspirational people like yourself. And we just, we've stuck with it because it has seemed to have really resonated with people and provided some helpful benefit in some way.
Yeah, I appreciate you allowing me to share our story on there. That was just a great, meaningful time. The COVID obviously changed everything, but some try to bring out some of the positives. I mean, like you said, the podcast that reaches more people. I find people like podcasts. At least I hope they like ours because they get to see face to the name and really talk about some important topics. So thank you for that.
So
What's some of the feedback that you've received from your show?
Some of the feedback has been, thank you so much for doing this. It has been so helpful, even for, people who might be a young startup and they're trying to get this great, resource to families and to even other professionals, but they might not have like a marketing budget or a PR person. Podcasts are a great way, and, they find us one way or another. And they'll reach out, and we're very particular though, because our reputation and integrity really means a lot to us, and the trust that these families and these caregivers place into All Home Care Matters. So myself and our team will look at a product, we'll review it, we'll read about it before we make a decision whether or not we can put them on the air with us. And if we make that decision, we put them on, and we're trying to help them, which will ultimately help family caregivers.
Yeah, and I noticed you'll be speaking at an upcoming summit for dementia, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'll be promoting it too. Do you have any other things? I know we spoke about hopefully doing something together, but do you have any plans and development of things that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would like to eventually do, like you and I working together, and we have a new show that's coming out this month with Denise that we've been, preparing for several months now. Because there's, a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that, I'm sure you can appreciate, but people who don't have a podcast or a show may not fully understand all the inner workings that go on before you launch a show. And we're hoping eventually to having a fully 24/7 online streaming platform where all these different shows with all these different people, whether it's for Parkinson's or, cancer, diabetes, dementia, whatever the issue may be, there will be a show on that channel for that person. That's my end goal at this point, is just trying to provide as many resources and helpful support to these families as we can.
Thanks. And I'd like to take a moment to go now, rewind back to your start. I know you had cared for your parents, so maybe we could talk a little bit about how to get more awareness for your advocacy also.
Yeah. So, when I was growing up, my grandparents, I was extremely close to them. My grandmother and grandfather, they lived down in the South, and I live in Michigan. So it wasn't like, let's go to grandma's for the weekend and just, 15, 20 minutes you're at grandma's house. It was always, a planned thing, almost like vacation for us, right? And so when I was old enough, I would go and spend, 4 to 6 weeks every summer with my grandparents. It was the greatest time. A lot of my cousins are down there, my aunts and uncles. And I did that, George, all the way through almost to being an adult. And then my grandmother ended up developing dementia,
Sorry.
and our family, we weren't aware of it. When I say our family here in Michigan, because I tell families all the time in my day-to-day job, you can call your loved one and they may have dementia, and you could have a 5, 10 minute phone call and you may not pick up on it. That superficial, how is it? Oh, things are wonderful, just I call it superficial discussions. But once you get below that superficialness and you get into, are your property taxes being paid? Are you taking your medication? A lot of times families, that's their tip off, or they spend a holiday weekend that they haven't seen them in person since the last holiday. Then they're starting to become aware and noticing things that you can't otherwise notice just on a regular phone call. So my grandmother, after my grandfather passed, she lived alone, and they're in a small town down south, so everybody knows everybody. Think kind of like Mayberry, right? And my grandmother would call the local police. There's people in my house having parties or doing this and doing that. And the police, the first 2, 3 times, were taking her seriously, maybe not so much by the third time. So then they notified my uncle who lived close by, and they knew him very well. And we had to have a family discussion because the police said, we can't come out every time this happens when there is no emergency and there is nothing wrong. You need to start making some hard choices and decisions, or next time we may have to make a hard choice or decision. So I actually was the one. I was in college at the time. I, loaded up my suitcase, went down, got grandma, and she came to live with my family and I for a good couple, 2, 3 years, until the point, and that was beneficial and helpful to her because she had that engagement, she had people around, and she was stimulated. But eventually the dementia did win over, and she did have to go in a facility. And it was just very shocking because, again, going back to phone calls, we never noticed or were aware that there was any issues. It wasn't until, you know, we get that phone call from the family and the police are getting involved. It was very sad. But when she lived with us, she did phenomenally great. And then what really transitioned me was, because I was pursuing medical school, was I get married, my wife and I are newlyweds. My father ended up having some severe health issues, and it was his visiting home healthcare nurse, his RN, reached out to us and said, it's not advisable for him to live on his own. It wasn't mental, it wasn't cognitive, it was more physical. And so he came to live with us, and he needed 24-hour care 7 days a week. And this went on for about 2.5 years. But my point in sharing that, and what was the most impactful about that for me, George, was we had some of the best healthcare providers in the state of Michigan coming to our house 3, 4 days a week doing home health visits for him, knowing what our situation is. And, I'm pursuing medical school. My wife has just begun her career, but we were never given any resources or information or even suggestions on what could benefit us or help us to even be more supportive for my father, but also beneficial for us, like respite, hiring a caregiver, or any number of things. And that just has really always stuck with me. And so I had the brilliant idea one day. I said, there's got to be countless other families going through what we're going through. I said, why don't we do something where we hire caregivers for families and send them into the home, not realizing very naively that there's a whole industry out there doing this. But again, just like us at that time or all these other families we encounter, I don't really hold them accountable for not knowing what they don't know either. It's not up to me to know what's available if it's not being shared with me. In the sense, I'm encountering nurses and, physical therapists and, surgeons regularly going through this with my father, sometimes 3, 4, even 5 times a week. I would have thought if there was something like that available, it would have been shared with us or we would have become aware of it, which never happened. So, but that unfortunately seems to still kind of persist today where all these families we encounter, they didn't know there's home care. They didn't know there's adult daycares. They didn't know, all these things they don't know what they don't know. So it's almost like, and you can appreciate this with all the advocacy you're doing, all these different organizations, all these different specialties and practices, they stay in their own lane or they're in their own silo and they don't branch out to the other ones. But really, at the end of the day, it's these families and these patients that suffer because of it.
And you don't sign up, I always say, or take a class to be a caretaker. You just kind of get thrown into it. It sounds like you
Absolutely.
are thrown into it. And also, I find like we're working together, it's much more important that everybody works together. So
Right.
our voices are so much stronger. And like, I won't ever bash any organization, but I do see in my experience a lot of them staying in, like you said, their own lane, not really wanting to branch out. And I think everyone should be working together, but that's what we have to kind of improve on.
Right.
Uh, can you list 3 words that describe who you are? Now we're going to get to the tough ones.
Ooh, wow. Well, first, I have a very difficult time talking about myself, but I will say,
Skip
I,
them.
I think I'm committed, dependable, and loyal.
I like those. I would agree. Well, what is one moment that's most memorable? It stands out through all of your work with awareness and all of the things you've done so far in your career in this field.
Well, it's not going to be related to the podcast,
All right.
but it will be related to my job. Early on, when our family started our company, being in Michigan, we're, Motor City, and the UAW, United Auto Workers Union, is an enormous, huge union, and their main headquarters are downtown Detroit. And we're a quick 20, 25 minute drive to downtown. And one of our good family friends was one of the secretaries to the president of the UAW, and she gave us an opportunity that I'm still very grateful for, to speak to all of the UAWs all together for a big event. And we're not salespeople. I don't care for salespeople myself, but what we wanted to do is provide them with tools and information because these are retirees. So either for themselves down the road or currently, or for their parents who most of them still living. And so we gave a big talk and, it was very well received. And, we get done and this gentleman and his sister came up and were speaking to us. Now they both retired from the, one of the big three, and they had a mother who was 99 years old and she was in a nursing home. She had a full hip replacement, which is amazing in and of itself, given her age. And they said, our mom's only wish is she wants to pass peacefully in the home she raised me and my sister and my siblings in, and that her and my father had lived in for their entire marriage. Now, people who know, downtown Chicago's, New York's, Philadelphia's, Detroit, there's these big, beautiful Victorian style homes. I mean, they're just gorgeous. Some of them more run down than others. Theirs was very beautiful. And so his question was, though, we can't bring mom home until we buy her a hospital bed. So already my flag goes up. And we said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, could you meet with us at the home, this week? So we went over there and met, and he's filling us in more. Mom was in a nursing home or rehab facility, and the facility said, we will not discharge her. They didn't need to hire us for our services. They were just getting information and help, and we were happy to provide it. They wouldn't discharge mom unless they bought a hospital bed so that the facility could say she's safely able to be discharged home. It was going to cost them something like $4,000 or $5,000. And he's like, my mom, she was a housewife. She's from the old era. She didn't work outside of the home, nor did like my grandmother. That's a lot of money for her, but we're going to do it. He pulled out of his wallet a folded over check made out to the facility. And our nurse was with us for this meeting as well. And her and I both told them, don't buy that hospital bed. You don't need to buy it. And he's looking at us very skeptically, and I don't blame him. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Then my mom can't come home. We said, no, get a written prescription from her doctor. There's a thing called DMEs through Medicare, durable medical equipment. She can get a lot of help, if not the whole thing covered through Medicare with a doctor's order. He's like, well, the doctor there even said we had to buy one. Well, he followed our advice and it was very easy. I said, if we're telling you wrong, you're not out anything. But if we're telling you right and you buy that chair or that bed for $4,000 or $5,000, that's money you could have put towards your mom's care or whatever other expenses. And so he took our advice. He said, well, I'll call her doctor. I've been dealing with the facilities doctor. He called the next day. This was a Friday. I had a voicemail on my phone. I look, it was him. I listened to his message. This is a grown man in his late 60s, tough as nails, retired UAW worker, worked on the lines, building, your Chevy trucks or your Ford Mustangs, whatever it was. He was literally in tears, choking up, thanking us, saying, you guys were absolutely right. And then come to find out, this particular facility, George, owned the medical supply and equipment company they wanted them to buy that bed from. So he's like, I started putting two and two together. And he's like, but we got the bed. It's coming Monday. I can't thank you guys enough. That's why I love what we do. All the great guests and stories and families that we've met on All Home Care Matters are tremendous. Anytime we can help just make the smallest of differences. I mean, that family kept in touch with us for years. And I mean, we never even serviced them. We met with them. There was no financial gain whatsoever from us. I'm just big on, kind of the golden rule in Christianity is, do unto others as you want had done unto you, and we really try to practice that because I was that guy 15 years ago or whatever now dealing with my father, not having a clue what way to go. And if somebody would have told me do X, Y, Z, and they're a healthcare professional, I probably would have done X, Y, and Z because you trust what your medical professionals and your medical team tell you.
As you're talking, I think of so many topics, but just we could spend hours on financial issues. So, as you know, we spend about 12,000 a month just on having. I don't like saying babysitters, but they were kind of just people I needed to be watching over my mother so she wouldn't fall when I wasn't there. But I mean, that's not normal or reasonable for regular people. So this year is a big one in history because we're hoping they'll pass the first ever national plan to end Parkinson's disease through Congress, actually through the Senate, and that'll help, funding for families and caregivers. But hopefully, I know my senators are on board, luckily, but we know we need everybody.
And you're going to be a part of that signing, George.
Yeah, I would love to, but who knows? You never know. I called the senator. We have Marco Rubio and Senator Rick Scott, so you have to keep following up. But they already signed on, so they kind of didn't need me at that point. But I'm glad that I'm in a state that supports it. The bill passed so overwhelmingly positive. There were only like 6 people. I still am baffled as to those 6 why they didn't vote for it, but thankfully about 400 more did. So that's it's about time we have something for Parkinson's. Next area that is important to me that you might not be asked a lot about, but who helps you in times of struggle? I was a caregiver as you were. What tips can you also give those who are listening who are caregivers? But I know as we spoke, my wife, without her, I wouldn't mentally be there. And it was tough days going to my mother's house, seeing her struggle and not being able to tell her the truth because we really didn't know. The doctors kept saying you never die with Parkinson's, you die with it, which was not true for our case. But it's so unique because every person's so different. But I guess it's a two-part question. Number one, who's there to support you the most, like a person, loved one, and then the other one was if they're caregivers, obviously they probably are, but listening, are there any tips you might give them?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, we're really strong in our church and our faith. And I feel like, even if a person isn't of a specific faith or a believer or what have you, it's a good support. It's a good support. Outside of that, my wife was an amazing rock, still is to this very day. But you gotta imagine too, we're newlyweds, and all of a sudden we're having my father unexpectedly, unplanned for, unanticipated, moving in with us needing 24/7 care. And she was an absolute saint and, never hesitated for a moment. We were glad to do it. And there was ups and downs. I'm trying to do my thing academically. She's got her new career. And but she never wavered. And, it was very stressful, very mentally, physically, and sometimes even a financial exhaustion as well. And then it would be my mother. My parents were divorced, but they maintained a cordial relationship. And you know, my mom would sometimes, like, if my wife can't take off more work and he had surgery or had an appointment, she would go with me, or if I couldn't because I had an obligation that I can't get out of, and we all understand how those things do happen, she would go in and check to see how he's doing, and things like that. So having those two, they're are you can't replace that, right? Like with your wife. The tips I would give caregivers today, I wish I had back then. First is find out as much as you can about your loved one, what their wishes are, so that if you do find yourself in a position where you're having to make decisions for them, that their decisions are being respected. The third would be, if time allows, join a support group. For me, my friends were great, my peers were great. Anybody I was responsible to, they were fantastic. But the one thing that for me would have been nice that was lacking, and it's no fault of their own, is they had no true understanding of what I was going through. And maybe you could, relate to that with, going through that with your mom. So it was hard to really be able to tell them, oh, you're not going to believe this, or this is how, the week went, or this is what we're going through. If you haven't had to be that family caregiver, you can't really appreciate what the family caregiver is going through. I like to equate it, and this is kind of maybe too simplistic. When we were expecting our first child, we were always told how great it's going to be and how much you're going to love that baby and this, which is all true. But I never really grasped how enormous that love is until you're actually holding that new baby in your arms. You can understand it and you can get it, but you can't truly appreciate it until you become a parent and you're holding the baby. I feel like that's a little bit of the way caregiving is. People can understand how much you must be going through and how tough it must be, and the challenges and the ups and the downs and the emotional drain and physical drain, but they don't truly understand it, because if they haven't gone through it, it's impossible to understand.
Yeah.
So surround yourself with people. Your support group, your social circle is important, but if you can, either virtually or in person, go check out some of your local support groups. They're out there and they're wonderful, because everybody there has that one common thing in common, and that is they are all caregivers.
Yeah, I was in a weird place, like I mentioned before, because I'm no longer somebody who is caring for a caregiver with us, and I'm not diagnosed with Parkinson's or dementia. So we decided to start something. So I'm finally going to have, starting next month, the first through PSP awareness, some incredible organization. They're going to be hosting me. I'm going to be the first, in my opinion, ever that I've seen, because I've been to 20 different support groups, but we're going to be having it for people who lost loved ones, but due to any disease. So it's not just Parkinson's, it's for dementia, it's for every, I mean, you're welcome, anyone's welcome. It's completely free. It'll be once a month. And my thing is, I always had a few, and there were people still alive, still caring. So I didn't want to talk about my experiences because I didn't want to depress everyone. And now it's like going to be a safe place where, and it won't be recorded, of course, but very private. But it'll be interesting. So, there's a lot of, I think support groups are great. I didn't really have one when I was going through it. I
Right.
didn't have the time and I couldn't find one. And luckily, though, I have my wife, but I would have loved to have had something like that when I was going through it. But so going back one question, since we might work together too, but are there topics that are, harder to cover, or topics that you might want to dive into in the future that really aren't being discussed?
I think one for me, and this is more of a matter of opinion. One of the hardest topics for me was talking about children. We're both parents, and we've been fortunate that our kids are healthy and don't have any health needs. But we had a mother on not that long ago who her son was born with special needs, and she had reached out to us, just had following the show and knowing about who we are, and she shared her story about her motherhood and of her son for the very first time, and it was on our show. And that meant a lot to me, but it also impacted me a lot as well, because as her and I are talking, I'm just thinking, sometimes we'll get irritated or aggravated, it's time for bed, turn the light off, quit talking, settle down. But it's like, listening to her story, it really puts into perspective how fortunate, you are with what you have. And, for her to share that story for the first time with us just really meant a lot, but it was a hard topic. I think, I hear people say all the time, one of the most unnatural things in life is a parent having to bury a child. You know, I hope to never have to experience that. But, there are people that have had to, or may be going to in the future, and they know that. I just think that's such a difficult topic.
Thank you. Now we get to an area I call the lightning round. I have
All
no clue
right.
why I named it that, but it's just for fun.
Sounds fun.
Throw out a bunch of questions, and if you don't like it, you don't have to answer. Then we'll wrap up. But let's see how this goes. So, is there something you would have been done differently today, looking back 10 years ago?
Something I would have done differently. I would so sticking with the caregiving theme, I would have asked more questions about how do we get more help for caregivers, given what, I was going through at that time.
Thank you. Then, what do you hope to do in the future in terms of awareness? So obviously you're out there, but what is your hope? Like my hope is to have a cure for Parkinson's and then I'll go away. But I don't know if that's happening anytime very soon, but I do feel it's moving closer.
Absolutely. I'll give you kind of a two-part answer.
Thank
First, I'm hoping to reach as many family caregivers as possible. But secondly, I'm hoping that every family caregiver won't feel isolated, they won't feel alone, they won't feel hopeless, and they won't feel lost. I think that kind of ties into reaching the family caregivers, but just them also not feeling ashamed. All the time that we were providing that care for my father, it wasn't out of shame or anything. I didn't know what I didn't know. George, I never once even identified or even thought of the word family caregiver. I didn't even consider that. I felt like I was just a son honoring and helping my father who needed my help. But I was just like, I'm sure with you, I was a caregiver in every true sense of the word, but it never entered into the conversation or in my thoughts.
How do you think we could better promote awareness? Like, not just again, this is not just about Parkinson's. Obviously, my mother unfortunately also had dementia, came on towards the end, but there are many diseases, Alzheimer's, and so many sadly out there. Dystonia is a condition, and fibromyalgia. My mother seemed to have so many that I didn't even know what was going on. But
Right.
I always said some nights I don't sleep just thinking about ways to reach people. One thing I've learned and I'm trying to do, as you might know, is I'm trying not to just concentrate on the Parkinson's community. I love everyone. They're really supportive. I've done over 500 interviews, but my dream is to reach people who do not have Parkinson's and people who are not caretakers of Parkinson's, because the only way I find we'll ever find a cure is to get everyone in the whole world together. So what about you? What are your views on future for awareness, even for all home care matters, and just getting the word out there? I know being like speaking, I love when you do that and podcasts, but any other ideas?
I Well, one was the streaming, just
Sure.
another avenue for people
That's
to,
exciting.
yeah, to become aware. But I think just like, your example, you have 400 and some people signing off on this Parkinson's bill, and then you still have six in this day and age. who would say no, and I don't know the reasons for saying no or even who said no. It's until you change the hearts and minds of those that make these kind of decisions, in getting into our institutions, medical schools, nursing schools, even, schools for CNAs and, paramedics, just making them aware of the need for people to have awareness of what to be on the lookout for, what to be aware of, and then having something tangible that you can hand them. You leave your, dentist's office, you get, if you're a child, you get a sticker and maybe a sucker. If you're leaving a doctor's office and you're taking your spouse or your parent because you're having to be their caregiver, there should be a packet. Here you go. Maybe there's some resources in here to help you. It's just reaching those people that sometimes feel unreachable.
And if you could have one wish granted, what would it be?
End to all illness.
That's a great answer. And if you could leave not just well, let's say all the communities of all the individuals unfortunately going through these things, but if you could leave some words of encouragement, what would it be?
You're not alone. There's people out there to support you who have gone through or are going through what you're dealing with, and there is help. You're not by yourself. And I think the isolation is one of the biggest things. Like I said, I think people sometimes feel like, you know what, I'm in this little community, my circle of friends, none of them are going through anything like this. And it could lead to a depression, an isolation, loneliness. Just knowing you're not alone and there's help. Anywhere you look, there's help. You just have to know and be able to find it.
Final area was if you were asked to write a script to a movie about your life story, what would you call it? That's a tough one.
Wow, that is a tough one.
That's why
Uh,
that's why it's called a lightning round. I don't
ooh,
know.
I'm feeling thunder now though. Now,
We need to put
uh,
Garth Brooks Thunder Road.
uh, um, the advocate.
Nice. And then on that note, not only want to thank you for joining me today, but is there anything that you wanted to touch on or still have some time, but that you might have wanted to bring up, future projects, things that I might have missed?
Well, like I said, you and I are going to be working together here in the future, and we have a new show called The Caregiver's Journal that will be coming out this month, actually. Which this show for you, George, or for any of your viewers and listeners, this is specifically for family caregivers. There might be the occasional professional on, but they probably have happened to be a caregiver at some point. And the idea is we're trying to tell the story because everybody's story is different, but we're doing it instead of calling it an episode, it's going to be called chapters. So, like, chapter one is all about the diagnosis day. And these caregivers are going to be sharing and talking about what they went through when they got that diagnosis. And then it's going to transition from, their entire journey and the idea behind it is hearing from real caregivers who have real stories, who they might found something that might work that didn't work for someone else, but they might have found something that works that another caregiver watching or listening may not have thought of. And now they got this great idea. But really, for me, the overall view is letting these viewers and listeners who are caregivers know, again, you're not alone. There are others out there going through this, and I think just knowing you're not by yourself, I think is a tremendous, just emotional and psychological benefit for people.
I agree fully. And again, I just want to thank you for coming today. I know how busy you are and you're touching so many people's lives for the better. And I'm grateful for that because you always also motivate me to keep fighting.
I,
So thanks, Lance, again for joining me today on Q&A with Sharon, son George. Hopefully this is just the first, many other journeys together. But I always end every podcast with a message to everyone. Thank you for listening, of course, and hopefully you can all share this. It's very important to get the word out of all home care matters, and it means a lot in my heart. But we love everyone listening. We support you and we care about you, and you're never alone, as Lance even mentioned several times. I will advocate for you, and together our voices are so much stronger. And I always joke and say I'm just getting started because I've been doing this for a few years, but every day it's a different thing we are thrown, like COVID, the life situation, struggle, and you just, you can never give up. And that's whether for caregiving or anything in life. So again, I want to thank you for teaching me too today. It's amazing, no matter how many degrees you have or work experience, I'm fascinated by how much I keep learning. So again, thank you, Lance. Thanks for all home care matters, and thank you for all as well for your love and support. And like I said, this is just the beginning. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.
You're welcome, George. Can I say one thing
Oh
before
yeah,
we?
please. You can say
I
more than
I
one.
I just I just want to say, and that your kindness and your words truly mean more than you can imagine to me and to us here at All Who Care Matters. But I want to just say to your viewers and listeners and to you, when we first met and I was reading about your story and, your love for your mother and just, the love you have for advocacy for all these others that are going through this terrible disease, you're a tremendous inspiration and you're such an invaluable asset to caregivers and the advocacy for, finding a cure for Parkinson's and just for caregivers in general. So I want to thank you for being such a great inspiration.
I appreciate it. It means a lot. The thing that really, I mean, unfortunately, every time I hear about a cure, I want it, but it's too late for my mother and our family. But then I've made so many people have become like you, like family and friends. And I think about them at night, how they're suffering or going through, Parkinson's or dementia, and I'm also might be optimistic, but I can still get all these things. So you never, if you think you're not going to get affected by this with a family, then you're not, you have a lot to learn still. Not
Yeah.
you, but
Well,
that's what keeps me up at night still, even though it's too late for us. So many other people, there's about 1 million people approximately in the US with Parkinson's and 10 million throughout the world. But it's one of the fastest, sadly, growing neurodegenerative diseases in the world. And that's frightening. So, I mean, the only journey I always say to myself, I always mention to my wife that I'm kind of cutting back on the interviews and going more to this type of format. It was a lot of work, but it's the one journey out there that I don't know about or not aware of, the one that crushes me and hurts my heart because people need their stories to be told, but there's just, there's people out there that we just don't know yet about. Hopefully, through this podcast today, they'll learn about us and know that like you said, they're not alone, but it's important to share their story so that they don't think they're alone. The people who are private, I completely respect, understand. Some of the bigger foundations I can't understand that won't want to work with everyone, but I just want everyone, and you'll see sometimes they'll still post, share your journey. Because I think if I didn't share my mother's journey, she would have been forgotten. I would never have been known. And it's not really about like, I don't accept money. We don't accept donations. I don't want a penny. Even my book that's going to be released and the interview books, I don't want really anything for, but I just want somehow to, send the message to the whole world that we're never going to stop till there's a cure.
absolutely. And I know you won't too.
Yeah, some days it's hard. There's just so many topics. You were talking this 40 minutes that I could think of full podcasts about just, taking care of yourself, which I didn't do. Advocacy, death with dignity, medical. I mean, it's just amazing when we talk how many more things that come of it. And I'm excited for the future, not just for a cure, but to know that there are people like you and that we'll be able to team up and really target and hit some of these topics. I love the tough topics because unfortunately, like end of life, nobody's talking about, and we need to because you can't be prepared. Thankfully, my mother was very prepared. She didn't know it was going to end her life, but she had already done a will. She had already done her funeral, like everything. She picked everything. It was like a dream for me because I can't imagine having to do that on top of it. And I have my speech that I spoke at my mother's funeral that I'll have to repost again, but it was not easy to get through. But I always joke too. If she was with us now, she'd say, "George, don't do this. Go back to your family." But we have to do it. And with people like us out there, I think that we're going to get some great things done. So
Yep.
thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. And thank you for the opportunity, George.
No problem. Thank you. And thanks to all the listeners and all the future listeners. And really, I always say if we just reach one person, then we've changed the world for the better. So thanks, everyone. This has been again Q&A with Sharon, son George. Hopefully we'll come back again shortly. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Sending our love and